Hello again, everybody. This is Derek coming at you with another Harnmaster video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about injuries and injury recovery and wounds and all things the physician. Basically, injuries, hit points, damage, combat wounds. That's what we're talking about. Now, this is going to be a two-part video. The first part is going to be raw. Okay, that is rules as written. This is going to be the raw information from the Harnmaster role-playing game. And then the second half, or intermixed with the first half, I'm not sure how it's going to work out, but my goal is the second half of this video, I'm going to talk about the changes that I'm making in my campaign, my personal campaign, and why I'm making them. This is not scripted. I've done some thinking about what I'm going to say and do, but I didn't write a script, so I might go off script because, hey, I don't have a script to go off of. So if you come to any of these other videos, or if you haven't come to any of these other videos, you should check out our introduction and our combat tutorial, character creation, magic, religion. I'm doing a lot of these videos to show new players what you can expect to see in Harnmaster, but also to help me understand and also help everyone else understand the rules. Okay, so Harnworld, it's been around since 1983, so it's got many years, 40 of development and background and history. Now, Harnmaster is the role-playing game for Harnworld. Harnworld can be used with any role-playing system, but Columbia Games has decided to make a game that fits in perfectly with their Harn world. Now, this is the third edition of Harnmaster. I think they're on edition 3.1. This is edition 3. Well, I guess it's errata to 3.1, 3.01. There are some add-ons that they fixed, as well as there's differences between Harn 2nd edition to Harn 3rd edition. And one of the big things is the physician. They made the physician rules a lot easier to understand and use. Now, because I didn't play Harn 1 or 2, I don't know how bad it was. But this system seems to be fairly straightforward and fairly easy. So we're going to go through. I'm going to show it to you. But just as a general rule of thumb, I think that Harnmaster is the rules as written. I think it's kind of brutal for the players. Okay, so let's go ahead and scroll. Now I'm going to be scrolling quite a bit to get to it because the physician rules are deep in the book. But I just wanted to point out, look at all these abbreviations that Harn uses throughout its rulebook. Most of these are pretty easy to understand, like END is endurance, DEX is dexterity. Everybody knows these from all the other games that you've played. But there are a few in here that that I personally didn't really understand, and it took me a little while to get used to some of these other abbreviations. But now that I've got them down, it didn't take that long. It just took, sitting down and figuring it out. Throughout this tutorial, throughout this review of the rules, you're going to see that I'm going to refer to Dungeons and Dragons quite a bit, and 5th edition specifically, to give you a point of reference so you can kind of see some of the differences between D&D and Harn. So I'm just using it as a point of reference. Not that I feel like one system is better than the other, even though I do feel, because they both have advantages. They both have advantages. It's easy to see, but they also both have disadvantages, which I'll explain that. But I would, if I was going to sit down and play an RPG, I would prefer to play Harn. Okay, so making a character, getting past all of that, and then we get to the skills. There is a skill called Position. Like you have skiing, stealth, etc., etc. And then craft skills, and we get to a craft skill called Physician. Now, this first use, these are training times to be able to pick up and learn these skills. So, like to get runecraft, you have to practice it and study it and be taught through training for 6 months before you get it, before you can learn the actual skill. But it looks like Physician is an automatic, or I should say, the first time you use it, you can learn the skill. Now, anytime you see in the rule book, anytime you see a little box like this or like that, what that is showing you is that that is an optional rule. So you don't actually have to use these checks. And you'll see that throughout the rules. Okay, so you had all the skills. Now we're going through the combat profiles. There's a few pages of combat. Mounted combat, missile combat, jousting, the results of combat. And then after that, you have Physician. There's only a couple of pages of Physician. It looks like 4 pages of Physician, where in a game like D&D, you might have 2 or 3 paragraphs about healing. Okay, so let's talk about. There's a society for physicians. Now, this, even though it's Harnmaster, remember Harnmaster was built for Harnworld, so they will touch on things that is economical, like political, economic, societal, and they talk about the society for the physicians. It's not really, I don't consider it like a position of like a rule. It's more like lore or backstory. But where else are you going to put it? This is a good spot to put it, is in and near the physician rules. But it's really just lore and backstory, and it tells you down here some fees that they might charge for surgery and stuff like that. Okay, so now we're talking about we'll start with an injured character. They advise that you seek medical attention right away, of course. But they also mention that Harnic doctors are far more competent than their medieval Terran colleagues. So what they're saying is the doctors in the RPG, role-playing game world, are more competent than our doctors during the Middle Ages. Because what did our doctors do during the Middle Ages? They put leeches on you to suck your blood that is poisoned by demons, and they tried to get the demons out of you. And as you know, sucking your blood would weaken the person, and they wouldn't be able to fight off infection or have the required strength to heal or live through wounds. So our doctors were a little misguided in the Middle Ages. But in Harn, they understand what's needed to heal someone. They know that they need to clean their surgical equipment. They know the different herbs and that are needed. Well, because this world is full of magic, and there are some races have people that have been around for thousands of years, and because of that, they've learned different alchemical, like potions or healing tonics or what have you, that actually do work. So you're looking at a more improved doctors in Harn than in Earth. But I will have to say that even though the Harnic doctors are better and more proficient, it's still a little too brutal for the players. And in the second half, I'll explain what I'm going to do to make my healing rules more comfortable for me. Okay, so last paragraph here. If no doctor is available, any friend can administer treatment. So yeah, everybody that's got the physician skill can perform treatment. So if you're in a party of 10 or whatever, and one of you gets injured, another one of you can run up there and apply a bandage. Like this guy's doing it to himself on the screen, right? He's applying a bandage to himself. You can do that, but you can only do that to the slight wounds, the moderate to there's like, I'm not sure what the first level of wound is, but then there's 4 levels. There's grievous, which is like really bad, serious, moderate, and like a light wound. So the light and the moderate, you can apply medical attention to yourself, but the grievous and the severe, you can't. You'll have to use, someone else will have to do it for you. Now there's esoteric. Esoteric is a term that Harnmaster uses for non-conventional. So like magical or rituals or potions or psionics, those are all considered esoteric. When you're performing actions, there is an action called esoteric action, and that's what it's saying. It's saying it's a non-conventional, usually magic-related type action, like you're casting a spell or you're applying a potion or something like that, or something like that. And that's as easy as it is. Okay, injury recovery. Now you notice here blood loss, they consider that to be an optional rule, and diagnosis is considered an optional rule. So blood loss, we're kind of just going to go over that a little bit. It says if you have a bleeding, you have to use the bleeding wounds rule, right? So there's another rule in combat where a wound can cause your wound to bleed, like you're bleeding out, and then if it's not halted, the patient bleeds to death. But wounds may be treated only after all bleeding stops. So the first thing you have to do is stop the bleeding, and then you can treat the wound. And it says see physician 3, and that's where we're getting ready to get to. Okay, and then the other optional, which personally I'm not planning on using blood loss unless I feel it's okay. Normally blood loss is not going to be used in my game unless I feel, and it has to be an emotional feeling at the time that it would either further the story or it will become cinematic. So if blood loss, if I feel like a situation where blood loss would become important or exciting, then I'll throw it in. But as a general rule of thumb, I'm not going to use blood loss. So that should tell you a little bit about the way I run my games. I don't always stick to the rules, right? Sometimes I will fudge something one way or the other to just make it a better experience. Okay, but in general, it is an option rule for the referee to use or not use. And then the last one here, diagnosis, is an option rules. And I have a feeling about diagnosis, which I'm going to share in a minute. But what this is saying is the physician, the person applying the medical care, has to run up and figure out what the problem is, right? He has to do a little triage before he can apply the treatment, right? So you roll for first to determine what it is, and then you go to treatment. Where in my opinion, I don't like this rule. And I think it's a good rule for someone that's not applying treatment. Like you're just going to go up and like look at somebody and see what his problem is. Okay, I don't have a problem with that. Which that's just a normal use of your physician skill anyway. But if you're going to be applying treatment to someone, that's the next step. And if you're going to have to test against your physician skill anyway, I'm going to personally roll in to the treatment role the diagnosis part. So what I'm trying to say is because it's not two different skills, it's the same skill. It's physician to diagnose and then physician to treat. So I'm just going to have them make one roll, and it's going to be the treatment role, and I'm going to assume that the physician, through his treatment process, is also diagnosing. He's figuring it out. He's like, okay, what's wrong with you? It looks like you got a broken leg. Let's go ahead and put it back together. That's all part of the treatment role. And that's the way I'm planning on doing it. Okay, so the treatment table, which is on the next page, suggests that there is a treatment. They give a list of treatments like, is he going to apply a splint? Does he have to apply a bandage? Does he have to amputate? Or whatever the treatment is. If the physician just runs up and says, I'm applying the treatment, whatever it is, you don't have to roll for applying the treatment. You just have to perform the treatment. Like, I'm going to put on the splint. That's automatic. You just do it. And if you put the splint on the table, there's a column that says treatment. So what that means is you get a plus to your treatment roll if you applied the proper treatment. You should always get it, but sometimes you just don't have a way to splint, or sometimes you don't have a bandage, so you can't apply a bandage. So sometimes you actually don't do the treatment. And if you don't do the treatment, then you get the NT, which is the no treatment. So that's what you would, when you're trying to improve your skill, or not improve your skill, when you're trying to improve the status of the wound, heal the wound, the injured character rolls on the NT column and not his respective other column, which we'll get into. Only a treated wound will get a different column. But and I'll get into that better when we actually pull the table up. So this is just explaining how you actually do the treatment. Now, if you don't let's say you don't have a splint here, but you have one back at camp, and so you want to carry this wounded character back to camp. You have to put the treatment on within 24 hours of receiving the wound, but you can wait. And every 24 hours that you don't apply the treatment, you get a -5. It's a -5 per day. Um, and then once you, like 3 days later, you apply the splint, then you get -15 on your treatment roll. Okay. You also only treat a wound once. You make, and this is in bold, you make only one treatment roll per injury. So if I get hit in the shoulder and in the forearm, those are going to be two different wounds. Each one will get its own treatment roll, but it will only get one. And then it will apply a healing rate to each of those wounds. Now, once you've got your healing rate, then you can see how fast you can actually heal. And that's healing is based on your healing rate. And that's also on that same table. Now, here's something that this is one of the reasons why I think this physician skill rules is brutal. Because, man, I got an itchy eye. So once an injury is treated, then the injured party, the person who's wounded, can make healing rolls to reduce the effects of the injury. And once it's reduced to 0, then it's completely healed. But you can only roll once every 5 days, right? So if you have an injury, level 1 even, if you get an injury and then you roll to see if it heals, if it doesn't, then you got to wait another 5 days. So that means you would be convalescing for at least 10 days. And then you roll, and if you fail, you got to go another 5 days. But hopefully, you won't fail so bad so often. But yeah, so you could be convalescing right here. You could be convalescing for many, many weeks on an injured leg or an injured arm or whatever. As an adventurer that wants to go dungeon delving, which is not really the theme of this type of a game or a theme of this type of a world. Dungeon delving is not really a thing, but it does. I could see where getting into a fight, getting injured, would take you out of the game for many sessions, because your friends who are not injured are going to press on and continue on with their adventure, and you'll be stuck back at the infirmary. So that's kind of harsh. And that's why I think it's brutal to a player. Okay. Now, physical penalties. Injury. Okay, so whenever you make an attack roll, you get a minus for how much weight you're carrying, your encumbrance, but you also get a minus based on how many injuries you've suffered. So if you've had 1 encumbrance and 2 injuries, you're at minus 15% to all your attacks. But injury and encumbrance penalties are ignored when you're making your healing rolls. Okay, if you are fatigued, like you've been on the march for a long time before you got your treatment and you started healing, I'm not sure how someone can have a fatigue penalty. It says, if any, because you're going to be sitting in bed for a week. And this says injured characters are supposed to get lots of rest. Yeah, I don't see how you could ever get any fatigue penalties unless you are force marching yourself after being treated, and when you do your healing rolls, you really shouldn't be allowed to do any healing rolls, because my understanding is you can only roll once every 5 days if you got at least 12 hours of rest each day. But that does leave you with a few extra hours that you could be doing things that cause fatigue. I'm not sure, unless you've got something affecting you like a disease or something that gives you permanent fatigue. But you could expect that to not really be a thing. Okay, let's take a look at this table. First of all, we already know that there's 4 major types of wounds or damages. Like when you're hit, you can take bludgeoning, blunt weapons. You have uh, an edge cutting, right? And then you've got puncture or piercing, and the last one is frost or burn. F, it's listed as F, Frank, but it means frost or burn. So if you get fire, obviously that's burn. If you get like ice breath, obviously that's frost or what have you. So when you look at this table, you'll see starting at bruise, ignoring this bleeder part because that's part of the blood loss rules that are optional. But normally, if you look, you got bruise, fracture, and crush. Those are all blunt damages, and then you got minor, serious, and grievous cuts, and then minor, serious, and grievous stabs, and then minor, serious, grievous burn, minor, serious, grievous frost. So this bruise, fracture, crush is minor, serious, grievous. They just forgot to put those words in there. Okay, you're with me. Now the description is what you could kind of imagine that type of wound would have done to you. So like a serious cut is a gash 2 to 6 inches long, right? 2 to 6 inch long cut in your arm is considered serious. And then over here where it says treatment, right? What is the treatment for this wound that you received? And remember I said, okay, you got to have treatment. Well, surgery does require medical supplies, right? Like not a first aid kit, but like medical supplies. Like maybe you need stitches or something like that. And because a clean and dress just means you clean the wound and wrap it with a bandage. But surgery means you got to get down there and actually apply some kind of knowledge. And if you, and like there's splint, surgery and splint or compress. Compress just means you're making a really tight bandage. And then there's tourniquet for bleeding, but we're not worrying about that. But if you apply the treatment, all you got to do is go, I'm applying the treatment. Unless it's surgery, and then you have to specifically, it'll talk about here, it requires 10d6 minutes, so up to an hour, right? Requires sharp knives, needle and thread, sutures, anesthetic. It's highly recommended. And then you could buy them at an apothecary, right? Great. So if it is treated, then you get this EML right here for the treatment. So like if using the serious cut as an example still, if you do receive surgery within the first 24 hours, then you get a plus 20, or I should say the physician gets a plus 20 on his physician skill roll. If you, and remember every day after the first one, every 24 hours that you don't get treatment, remember you get a -5 on your roll. Okay, so now once you figured out what the treatment is, you applied whatever inventory item and whatever time is needed, because like clean and dress requires 5 minutes. Okay, no worries. It needs water and bandages. There you go. So once you get that taken care of, then you come over and you make a die roll And here's the NT column, right? That's the no treatment, like you never received treatment, but you still want to, you just, uh, you you still want to heal, but untreated. So you've had your wound for 5 days. Um, okay, so at the end of the 5 day period after you're wounded, you get to roll on this table. The the physician is the one supposed to roll. But yeah, here, yes, the physician rolls and with his modifier, and he gets either critical failure, marginal success, or critical success. So let's go back to that 2 inch, and let's say he gets a marginal success. He gets an H5. Okay, this is the healing rate 5 times. Okay, and if you look down here under H5, healing rate is indicated either healing rate, um, yeah, times 5. Healing rate 5. Okay. If it has a little asterisk, and you can see a couple of these have asterisks next to them, if it does, then there's a permanent reduction to an attribute after the injury has been fully healed. So if you get like a grievous stab and you get the surgery and you roll marginal success, you got a healing rate of 4, but you still automatically lose 1d3 on a stat. And it's up to the DM to determine which stat is reduced. You know, if it was a cut on the face, you might lose comeliness. If it was a stab in the chest, maybe you'll lose a little endurance or something, but it'll be a reduction of an attribute. Okay. If it's the leg, maybe it's agility. If it's the hand, maybe it's dexterity, something, right? Okay, so with that healing 5 from that cut where we rolled a marginal success, we bring that, and then the 5 days transpire. You got to wait till the end of the 5 days. Once the 5 days transpire, then you come down here to the healing table, which is this second box right here. Test the healing rate times the endurance once per every 5 days for each wound. Okay, so my endurance is 11, let's say, and I got an H5. Well, that means I've got a 55% chance to heal, right? 11 times 5? 55. And if I get a marginal failure, nothing happens, right? So if I roll higher than a 55, but my roll doesn't end in 0 or a 5, then it's marginal, so it's no healing. But if I roll lower, then I reduce the injury level by 1, and injury levels can be 1, 2, 3, or 4. So let's say you've got a level 2 injury, because first of all, if I'm ever going to receive a gash, a serious wound, it's usually going to be a 2. And so this gash, instead of a 5, well, it's always going to be a 5, but instead of a 2, now it becomes a 1, right? And then in the next week, you got to roll again to see if you can get it down to 0. Wounds healed to an injury level of 0 or less are healed. Okay. Right. So right there, it took 10 days to bring that injury from a 2 to a 0. That's if I make marginal success. If I get a critical success, I can reduce it by 2 levels, so it would be healed after only 5 days. Or and an open wound, if I get critical failure, and if this is an open wound, it's now infected. So it gets worse, right? Open wounds are pretty much everything's an open wound, except for like a bruise is not an open wound, but anything that requires Yeah, open wounds are pretty much any stabs or slashes or serious bludgeonings. Okay, basically it means that there was some blood. You could see some blood. It had to be cleaned and wrapped or whatever. If it says clean or surgery, then it's definitely an open wound. Okay, so right there, as a player, you get hit. You spend 5 days. You get a bad luck roll because remember, 55 is not a very high physician, which is not a high injury recovery rate. Um, Maybe I roll a 75, and then that means it's a critical failure. Um, if I roll a 60, that would be a critical failure. This is an, and so it becomes infected. And then every day, you've got to roll on the infection. Once a wound becomes infected, its healing stops. So you you roll on the healing table after 5 days. It becomes infected, and then every day after that, you have to make a healing rate times endurance uh, to to see what happens to the infection, right? Uh, I think infections start at, there's a specific number. I think it's 5. Where is it at? We'll get to that in a minute. So the healing rate, this says it reduces the healing rate. Um, the infection disease is defeated at healing rate 6. The patient is dead at healing rate 0. So maybe it just, your healing rate gets better and you heal faster after the first 5 days. But so let's say on the 6th day you roll and you get marginal success, it increases the healing rate by 1. Remember, we had a healing rate of 5 originally. It becomes a 6. So now on day 6, you've removed the disease. It wasn't that infected, right? But now you've got to go another 5 days to get a healing roll. So effectively, that's been 11 days. And then, but let's say you don't roll marginal success. Let's say you roll marginal failure. Well, now that 5 becomes a 4. And now you're testing the healing rate times your endurance. My endurance was 11. So it's now 44% on this table. And you keep doing it until you get to healing rate 0. And as soon as you do that, your character is dead. Right? He died from infection. Brutal. That's brutal. Um, More than 75% of deaths from injuries during the Middle Ages were due to infection, death due to infection. So this would not be out of character for reality. But again, this is a fantasy game. I think it might be too brutal. Okay, but if you're doing a simulation of the Middle Ages, this is really good. I did a little research on medical.com or whatever it was about injuries and how fast they recover in the real world today. So in modern 2023 medicine, a cut on your arm that is 6 inches long would take over a month to heal. A small cut of 1 to 2 inches long takes normally about 14 days to heal. So this is actually faster than reality, but still it's not, it still doesn't line up with a game. Like in Dungeons and Dragons, a barbarian hero that fights a dragon, and he has, like, let's say he's got 100 hit points. Remember, this game doesn't use hit points, but D&D does. And let's say you got 100 hit points, and you fight this dragon for hours, and you get your hit points reduced to 1. Okay, you're not dead, you're not unconscious, you're not injured, you have no penalties, you are good to go, and the dragon expires because you win. Okay, but so now you went through this entire fight and you don't have a care in the world. You're at 1 hit point, but who cares? All you need to do now is rest for 1 hour, and you could get all of your hit points back. Because you have something called hit dice, you roll these, as many of them as you want, and when you level up, or when your character improves, you gain a hit die, and that hit die is rolled to determine how many hit points you get. So the hit points that you have were originally determined by the same hit dice that you're rolling to use to recover your wounds. I hope I didn't lose you there. So that barbarian sleeps for 1 hour. Not even sleeps, he just sits on his ass and rubs one out for an hour. Then he rolls all of his hit dice, because he's just bold like that. He could roll higher than his hit points, but he rolls a lot of dice and gets all of his hit points back. He could get less, he could get more, but let's just say he gets them back. And if there's a bard in the party, he might do a song of rest, giving you more dice. There's clerics that just give you points. They could give you 100 points with a touch of a hand. And then you're up and you're ready to go, continuing on with your adventure. Is that realistic? No. But is that good for adventuring parties to be able to go dungeon crawling? Yes, because you need a way to be able to shake it off, get up, and continue on. So you have to find a good balance between Harnmaster, brutal wounds, and D&D making it way too easy to heal. And I mean way too easy. Resting an hour and getting all your hit points back, I think that's just crazy, because there are adventuring parties that I've played with, that after you fight a monster, they all go, "Hey guys, let's sit down for an hour and get some hit points back." That's not role playing. That's playing the game. Okay, so let's go to the next page. This should be the last page, position 4. Now, shock recovery. Okay, that's a 4-hour roll. So every 4 hours you get to roll to see if you recover from shock. The only time every time you're hit and injured, it could be an injury 1, it could be an injury 2, 3, 4, whatever it is. Anytime you're hit and injured, you have to make a roll to see if you go into shock. If you succeed, then you continue to fight. But if you fail, you fall and go into shock. But if you succeed and you continue to fight, and then you get hit again, now you have to make a new shock roll using the new injury values. So if you had an injury 1 the first time and you passed, and then you get hit again for another healing or another injury 2 level, then now you've got to make a shock roll versus a 3, because you got that 1 and the 2. Okay, now once you go into shock, you want to come out of it, obviously. So shock is treated special. It's a separate injury. So on your character sheet, you'll type in shock if you fall into shock. Okay, here's where the 5 comes in. Shock automatically has an H5, and it has to be recovered to H6. So you only have to improve it by 1 level, and then you will be no longer shock. But if your shock value ever goes to 0, just like infections, you will die of shock. Now, for those of you that don't really know what shock is, okay, now this is my combat medic, my military combat lifesaver training coming into play here. Shock is your body shutting down. Okay, but usually it shuts down due to blood loss. Okay, so I don't think I need to have a second rule called blood loss when shock pretty much handles this. When your body is injured, your you have an internal mechanism inside your body that tries to keep you alive. And one way it does this is by closing off, shrinking the arteries and tightening up your extremities. So like your arms and legs will stop receiving blood because your body knows that the limited amount of blood you have left needs to go to the organs in your chest. And a lot of times your body, because it goes into shock, you lose consciousness because your head no longer gets that blood, and so you pass out. And that's what happens in the game. Now, one of the ways that we treated shock was we would elevate people's feet. We'd put it on their helmet or whatever, get their feet level, their legs above the level of their heart so that blood can come into their torso, and keeping their head down as well, because that will allow the blood to flow into the head as well. And then we would wrap them up with a blanket to keep their body temperature up, because their body is shutting down, and you want to preserve their functions. Okay, if you don't do any of this, your body fails to properly allocate your blood flow to where it needs to go, and some of your organs can actually shut down, and then that could kill you. So the way they deal with it in the game, which I'm really glad they do, is you have a shock recovery, and you roll a percentile every 4 hours on the shock recovery table, which is right here. You reduce it or increase it. If it makes it to 6, you've recovered from a shock. So after 4 hours, you could technically wake up and be fine. Or you could gradually go down to 0. You could be reduced until you reach 0, and then you're dead, right? While you're in shock, you really shouldn't be allowed to do anything. Okay, so what does it say here? The patient recovers from shock at 6 and dies from 0. Yeah. Okay, we already talked about healing rolls. You already know about that. blood regeneration. Blood loss is treated as a separate injury. Okay, if you were dealing with that infection, infection. We already talked about that. Diseases is a daily roll. Um, okay, so diseases are assigned a contagion index because there are things out there that cause diseases, like the bubonic plague, right? And each of those contagion index, a 1 is considered highly contagious, and 7 is barely contagious. Like COVID. Uh, and the healing rate, uh, like the bubonic plague, is a 1, and a 5 is influenza. So basically, it's going to have a contagion index and a healing rate if you get infected, right? And remember, this is a role playing game, so you know, so if the roll exceeds the target level, the character catches the disease and will soon display appropriate symptoms. And then you'll have to be, and then every day you roll to see if the infection or the disease gets worse. And yeah, remember, at 0 you die, at 6 you recover. And then poisons are done pretty much exactly the same way. And that's it. That's the healing. That's the healing rules. Now, give me a second while I change my screen just a little bit, and then we'll talk about what kind of changes I'm going to be making for my game. All right, guys, I'm back. I pulled up Roll20 just to give you something to look at while we chit chat and talk about philosophy. Okay, I'm going to present a scenario for you, and I'm going to explain why my mind is going in a specific direction. First of all, I want you to know that when I run a game of like epic consequences and challenges and stuff like that, I want my players to have legitimate choices where they know that if they do this one thing, they might get an advantage for doing it, but there could be consequences for not doing it or for doing it, right? So I want there to be, I want the players to know the ups and downs of each decision so that they can make a decision that would be meaningful and they would get to choose. If there's no decision, if it's just do this or else, then that's a railroad. Okay, and players don't necessarily like being railroaded. So here's the scenario and I'm just using this as an example. It's the exact same scenario I used during my live stream. So, and I think I explained it pretty well. And this covers enough bases to let you understand where my mind is at when it comes to injuries. And that's where what this video is about. So imagine there's a village and there is a evil temple, right? The players find out that there is a cult at the evil temple that wants to do harm to the village. And the players go to this cult to stop them. They have some cultists, they fight through the cultists. There's this high priest, he's in the throne room or whatever it is. They fight him, and he gets a lucky hit, or he's just a really good warrior, and he smacks one of the players in the leg for a grievous injury. Right? This guy is injured. he goes into shock. And he recovers from shock in 4 hours or whatever. He's hurt. The players were able to defeat the cult, and so everybody was involved. Everybody's happy. And through investigation of the temple, they find out that this demon has already been summoned and sent to go destroy this village. Okay. So that's the scenario. In Harnmaster, rules as written, the players have a couple of decisions to make. They either go after the demon with their injured compatriot who's got a grievous leg injury, probably getting a minus 20% to everything he does, and if he doesn't get it treated, the treatment level is going to go down and down, and so he can either come with them to fight the demon, or they could leave him behind at this temple and or take him into town, another town where there's a doctor that can treat a grievous injury, leave him there for 5 days minimum, probably 10 or 15 days based on the fact that it's a grievous injury. For 15 days, while they go deal with this demon, which shouldn't take 15 days, but let's say they go to the option is send him to the hospital, allow him to recover while they go take care of this demon. Or take him with them and they all fight the demon, even though he's got a big injury. So there is two decisions to be made here, but if you think about it, there's really not any decision. This is a false option. This is not a red herring, but it's like a false option. They don't have any options here. They're going to take their injured compatriot with them to fight the demon. No party in their right mind is going to take this injured guy to a hospital while this demon is destroying a village, and then go to the demon and fight him without their buddy. For one reason, he's out of the game. He's no longer playing anymore. He's just sitting there watching his friends have a good time. That's not good. And the players don't want to go fight without him. They want him to be there. So the only option they have is to take his injured, sorry ass to this fight. So that's a false option. Okay, so in my world, in my Harnworld, I'm changing the injury rules to, instead of a 5-day option, to a 1-day option. So after he gets injured, same scenario, the party now has a more realistic choice. They can leave him to heal for 1 day and then catch up, or they could wait for 1 day and go as a team. So now they have to decide, is 1 day worth waiting for him to get healed, or is it, or are we going to leave him and go without him? It's only 1 day. He'll still be out of the fight. Or are we going to take him with us and have him fight while injured? Those all seem to be realistic um, multiple choice options, which a party will actually have to sit and think. What are the advantages of doing this over this? And they might wait a day. Probably not. They're probably going to go and attack the demon anyway. But at least the party would have a conversation about it, and they would feel like they knew the consequences of not going right away, and so they chose to go right away. So by making the healing faster, it would mean that I could do scenarios that had multiple fights, because I do believe the Harnmaster is expecting a scenario that someone builds to only have one fight, and then it's over. Then you got to go heal, you lick your wounds, then you go find some other adventure that has one fight. And those aren't the kind of adventures I prefer to run. I like to run adventures where there's multiple encounters and there's choices and pitfalls and decisions to be made. Do we go left? Do we go right? Or are we going to split? And that's even worse. Okay. So I could speed it up even more to make the choice even harder and say it's a 12-hour healing, right? And they roll the die after 12 hours. Well, I don't want injuries to heal too fast, because then if they heal too fast, then they become less impactful, and combat resorts to being a D&D fight, which combat has no impact on a D&D game at all, because players have too many ways to heal themselves in D&D. In this same scenario that I just mentioned with the demon, if you've got D&D characters, they could rest, relax for 1 hour. They could have all their hit points back, and then everyone could go on to fight the demon in the village. So that would only be a 1 hour delay by somebody losing hit points. And even then, a loss of hit points is easily fixed with potions or clerics dropping spells. In this system, in rules as written, the healing potion doesn't do anything except it's actually a very minor type of healing potion. It gives you a plus, I think it's plus 25, which is pretty big, but it gives you a plus to your healing roll after 5 days of resting, right? So you still have to wait for the healing roll, which is a 5-day recuperation period, and then you roll, and if you drink a healing potion, you get a plus on the die roll. That's horrible. Now, clerics can heal instantly all of your wounds, which is pretty cool. But there's not going to be these clerics everywhere all the time. So another option is for me to take those, and this is what I plan to do, take those cleric spells and make healing potions that do similar things. Like, I'm going to use D&D as an example. A D&D cleric can have like a healing spell that heals like 2 dice of damage, some like hit points. And it goes up based on the level of the cleric. And healing potions come in different strengths. Serious wounds, superior, ultimate or whatever they call them, right? So they've got all these, I'm getting Skyrim mixed up, but let's just say they've got these different levels of healing potions, and those can heal dice as well. So they both effectively do exactly the same thing. Um, so what I'm thinking of doing is taking some of those cleric spells and bottling them, putting them in, making my own uh, world healing potions, which can be bought at an apothecary. So our knights can actually have healing potions on them. They get into a fight with this cult. One of them gets a grievous injury, and then they can drink a healing potion, which I'm going to make a very expensive, and they can instantly make some healing rolls instead. So I want to do healing potions in a couple of different ways. One of them is just like rules is written. At the end of the week, you get a plus. It's like a watered down healing potion. At the end of the week, you get your healing roll, and actually not the week, the day, right? At the end of the day, 24 hours later, you make, because that's how I'm going to do healing is 24 hours, not 5 days. So at the end of the 24 hours, you make a healing roll, but you get a plus on it. That's pretty good. And then the next level up is going to be you get one healing roll right now. Another one is going to be you get two healing rolls right now. And then another one is going to be you automatically get an injury removed, right? So, or one level of injury removed, or two levels of injury removed. And so I'm going to have multiple levels of healing potion, and the prices will change. And so, based on the type of healing that they want to do, they might be able to just down a couple of potions, their wounds close up, and then they can go after the demon in the next village, right? And that's the way I'm going to do it. It's going to be faster natural healing potions, or clerics, just like pretty much any other game. But instead of waiting 5 days, it's only going to be a 1 day wait for natural healing. And the way I'm going to kind of explain that is the bandages that you're using, or the herbs and the poultice that you apply, because when you apply a bandage, you don't just wrap it up with gauze. You actually take some healing plants that grow everywhere on the continent. You take some healing plants, you grind them up into like a little powdery poultice, you mix some water into it, you mix it up, you put it on the inside of the bandage, and when you apply it, it's actually applying some kind of, you know, uh, polysporin or something. It's applying some kind of healing salve, which heals or speeds the healing rate. Also, the players or the characters, the inhabitants of this world, because they live in this world and they eat the plants from this world, that they naturally have faster healing metabolisms because because of their veggies. They're eating these salads, and some of the plants that are in the salads are healing herbs, and so they just naturally have it in their blood flow. Um, the crops and the hops and the wheat barley, or whatever they're using in their ale and their mead, just has natural healing in it. So it's ever so small, but over the years of drinking it, living with it, eating it, their bodies just naturally have a better healing rate. And that's why I want to go, and that's how I'm gonna write it off as a 1 day healing rate. And then I have the herb lore book, and it talks about all these different plants and stuff. And I'm just gonna say that I'm gonna I'm gonna kind of use some of them or some and mixtures of them, make various types of healing potions. And that's a way to get players. Um, the injuries will still cause like amputations. They'll still poke out eyes. They'll so it doesn't like restore an amputated limb, right? That's something that a healing potion would not heal. But like if you get your arm cut off and there's and you drink a healing potion, it'll seal the wound, but you'll still be missing your arm. You know, so so it's a balance. There is a little bit of severity, but I don't want it to be debilitating where the players are unable to play the game. And Harn is not designed for multiple combat scenarios. It's really only designed for a one combat, resolve it to resolution, and then everybody go back to their keep or their village or whatever, lick your wounds before you go out to the next adventure. And I don't want to do that. I want to be able to make an underground complex that the players have to go from room to room to room to room to resolve the mystery of this underground temple. And if I put undead in one chamber and undead in another chamber, the players couldn't get through the adventure because they'd go into the first room, somebody's going to get injured, they're going to go back to their keep, and then they'll come back a second time to try to get through the thing. And it's just going to be time consuming, not playtime, because that's not that big of a deal, but game time. It's going to be months, will turn into years, which will turn into decades of these adventures. And I want their, I don't know. So I'm running my game on Wednesdays starting in May. You should come check it out. You can see these injury rules in play at that time. And hopefully I explained how brutal the Harnmaster injury rules are and what you could possibly do to alleviate the brutality of it. All right, I'll catch you in the next one.